Chapter 15. The Truth is Told. Mary sat alone in the living room in the vicar's house and looked into the fire. She had slept for a long time and now felt rested, but the peace which she desired had not yet come to her. They had all been kind to her and patient. The vicar had driven her himself in the carriage to Alton, and they arrived there as his church clock struck 1. He called his housekeeper from her home nearby, the same woman that Mary had spoken with in the afternoon. She lit a fire and warmed a rough woolen nightdress in front of it, while Mary took off her clothes, and when the bed was ready for her and the bedclothes turned back, Mary allowed herself to be led to it, like a child. She would have closed her eyes immediately, but an arm came suddenly round her shoulders, and a voice said in her ear, "Drink this." Francis Davy himself stood beside the bed, with a glass in his hand, his strange eyes looking into hers, pale and expressionless. "You will sleep now," he said, and she knew from the bitter taste that he had put some powder in the hot drink which he had made for her. The last thing she remembered was those still white eyes that told her to forget. And then she slept. It was nearly 4 in the afternoon before she woke. When she was dressed and had gone below to the living room to find the fire burning and the curtains closed and the vicar out on some business, it seemed to her that responsibility for the murders was hers alone. Jem's face was always with her, as she had seen it last, tired and lined in the grey light, and there had been a determination in his eyes then that she had tried not to see. He had played an unknown part from beginning to end, and she had shut her eyes to the truth. She was a woman, and for no good reason, in fact, against all reason, she loved him. He had kissed her, and she was tied to him forever. She felt herself weakened in mind and body, she who had been strong before. One word to the vicar when he returned, and a message to the magistrate, and Jem would die with a rope round his neck, as his father had done, and she would return to Helford and her old life. But she knew that the word would never be given. Jem was safe from her, and he could ride away with a song on his lips, forgetful of her, and of his brother, and of God, while she dragged through the years, bitter and miserable, coming in the end to be known as a woman who had been kissed once in her life and could not forget it. She heard the vicar's footsteps on the path outside and rose hurriedly. "Forgive me," he said. "You did not expect me so soon." He took out his watch. "You have had supper with me before, Mary Yellen, and you shall have supper with me again. But this time, if you do not mind, you shall prepare the table and bring the food from the kitchen. I have some writing to do, that is, if you have no objection." When the church clock said 7:15, they sat down together at the table, and he helped her to some cold meat. "I understand from Richard's servant to Mr. Bassett that you suspected the peddler of the murder and said so to Mr. Bassett himself. It is a pity for all of us that the locked room proves that he did not do it. He would have done very well as a man to hang and saved a lot of trouble." The vicar ate an excellent supper, but Mary was only playing with her food. He watched her. "What has the peddler done that you hate him?" "He attacked me once." "I thought so. You managed to fight him off?" "I believe I hurt him. He didn't touch me again." "No, I don't suppose he did." "When did this happen?" "On Christmas Eve." "After I left you in the carriage?" Yes. I'm beginning to understand. You didn't return, then, to the inn that night. You met the landlord and his friends on the road? Yes. And they took you with them to the shore to add to their sport. Please, Mr. Davy, do not ask me any more. I would rather not speak of that night ever again. There are some things that are best buried deep. You shall not speak of it, Mary Ellen. I blame myself for having allowed you to continue your journey alone. Turning back to the peddler, though, I feel it was very careless of the murderer not to have looked into the locked room. He would most certainly have made the whole affair more thorough. You mean he might have killed the peddler too? Exactly. If the murderer had known that he had attacked you, he would have had a strong enough reason to kill the peddler twice over. Mary cut herself a piece of cake which she did not want, and forced it between her lips. But the hand that held the knife was shaking. I don't see, she said, how I am involved in the matter. You have too low an opinion of yourself. They continued to eat in silence, Mary with lowered head and eyes fixed on her plate. She knew that he was watching her to see the effect of his words. But at last she could wait no longer, and a question burst from her. So, Mr. Bassett and the rest of you have made little progress after all, and the murderer is still free? The organisation appears to have been far larger than was formerly supposed. In fact, the peddler even suggested that the landlord of Jamaica Inn was their leader in name only, and that your uncle had orders from someone above him. That, of course, makes things look very different. What have you to say about the peddler's idea? It is possible, of course. I believe that you once made the same suggestion to me. I may have done. I forget. If this is so, it would seem that the unknown leader and the murderer must be the same person. Don't you agree? Well, yes, I suppose so. That should make the search easier. We may forget most of the company and look for someone with a brain and some character. Did you ever see such a person at Jamaica Inn? No, never. He must have moved about secretly, possibly in the silence of the night when you and your aunt were asleep. He would not have come by the road because you would have heard the noise of his horse. So, the man must know the moors. That is why Mr. Bassett intends to question every local man within 10 miles. So you see, the net will close round the murderer, and if he stays long, he will be caught. We are all sure of that. Have you finished already? You have eaten very little. I'm not hungry. I'm sorry about that. Did I tell you that I saw a friend of yours today? No, you didn't. I have no friends but yourself. Thank you, Mary Ellen. That's a kind thing to say to me. But you're not being strictly truthful, you know. You have a friend. You told me so yourself. I don't know who you mean, Mr. Davy. Come now. Didn't the landlord's brother take you to Lanson Fair? Under the table, Mary dug her fingernails into her flesh. The landlord's brother, she repeated, in order to delay her answer. I haven't seen him since then. I believed him to be away. No, he has been in the area since Christmas. He told me so himself. As a matter of fact, it had come to his ears that I had given you shelter, and he came up to me with a message for you. Tell her how sorry I am. That is what he said. I imagine that he meant that he was sorry about your aunt. It was just before I came away from North Hill this evening, when the discussion had ended for the day. Why was Jem Merlin present at this discussion? He had a right, I suppose, as brother of the dead man. He did not appear much moved by his death, but perhaps they were not close. Did Mr. Bassett and the gentleman question him? There was a great deal of talk among them the whole day. Young Merlin appears to have brains. His answers were very clever. He must have far better brains than his brother ever had. You told me he lived rather riskily, I remember. He steals horses, I believe. Mary agreed. Her fingers followed a pattern on the tablecloth. He seems to have done that when there was nothing better to do, but when a chance came for him to use his brains, he took it, and one cannot blame him, I suppose. No doubt he was well paid. The gentle voice wore away at her, and she knew that he had defeated her. She could no longer pretend that she did not care. What will they do to him, Mr. Davy? What will they do to him? The pale, expressionless eyes looked back at her, and for the first time she saw a shadow pass across them, and a momentary surprise. Do? He said. Why should they do anything? I suppose he has made his peace with Mr. Bassett and has nothing more to fear. They will hardly try to punish him for old crimes after the service he has done them. I don't understand you. What service has he done? Your mind works slowly tonight, Mary Yellen. Did you not know that it was Jem Merlin who informed against his brother? She looked at him stupidly, her brain refusing to work. She repeated the words after him like a child who learns a lesson. Jem Merlin informed against his brother. The vicar pushed away his plate and began to clear the table. Yes, certainly. It appears that it was Mr. Bassett himself who took away your friend from Lanson that night and carried him off to North Hill. You've stolen my horse, he said, and you're as big a criminal as your brother. I've the power to throw you into prison tomorrow, and you wouldn't set eyes on a horse for 10 years or more. But you can go free if you bring me proof that your brother at Jamaica Inn is the man I believe him to be. Your young friend said, no, you must catch him yourself if you want him. But the magistrate told him about the latest, bloodiest wreck, and suggested he changed his mind. I understand that your friend escaped from his chains, though, and ran away in the night. But he came back yesterday morning, when they did not expect to see him again, and went straight up to the magistrate and said, as calmly as you please, very well, Mr. Bassett, you shall have your proof. And that is why I remarked to you just now that Jem Merlin has a better brain than his brother had. Mary looked blindly before her into space, her whole mind split, as it were, by his information, the evidence she had so fearfully and so painfully built against the man she loved, falling like a house of cards. Mr. Davy, she said slowly, I believe I am the biggest fool that ever came out of Cornwall. I believe you are, Mary Yellen, said the vicar. After the gentle voice that she was used to, the sharpness of these words was a punishment in itself. The anxiety and fear had gone from her at last. "What else did Jem Merlin say and do?" she asked. The vicar looked at his watch. "I wish I had time to tell you," he said, "but it is nearly 8 already. The hours go by too fast for both of us. I think we have talked enough about Jem Merlin for the present." "Tell me something. Was he at North Hill when you left?" "He was. In fact, it was his last remark that hurried me home." "What did he say to you?" "He was not speaking to me. He told Mr. Bassett he intended to ride over tonight to visit the blacksmith at Warlegan. It's a long way from North Hill, but I expect he can find his way in the dark." "What has it to do with you if he visits the blacksmith?" "He will show him the nail he picked up in the grass down in the field below Jamaica Inn. The nail comes from a horse's shoe. The work was carelessly done, of course. The nail was a new one, and Jem Merlin, being a stealer of horses, knows the work of every blacksmith on the moors. 'Look here,' he said to the magistrate. 'I found it this morning in the field behind the inn. I'll ride to Warlegan with your permission and throw this in Tom Jory's face as an example of bad work.'" "Well, and what then?" "Yesterday was Sunday, was it not? And on Sunday no blacksmith works unless he has a special respect for his customer. Only one traveller passed Tom Jory's workshop yesterday and begged for a new nail for his horse's shoe, and the time was, I suppose, somewhere near 7 o'clock in the evening, after which the traveller continued his journey, a journey which included a visit to Jamaica Inn." "How do you know this?" said Mary. "Because the traveller was the Vicar of Altarnun," he said.